Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. If you are new here, welcome. It's always lovely to have you. And if you're returning, thank you so much for tuning in once again. Now, remember that you can listen to these podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever else you listen and enjoy your podcast. And make sure that you leave a comment, be it on our Facebook page at The Root of the Science Podcast or on Twitter and Instagram at The Root of the Science Pod. My guest today is Tosin Adewumi, originally from Nigeria and now based in Sweden. In this episode, we learned that he always had an interest in science, specifically astronomy and learning about the nature of space when he was in primary and high school. However, he chose to pursue a computer science degree and a postgraduate degree at a university in Nigeria. Currently, he's furthering his studies and pursuing a PhD in machine learning at Sweden's Lund University of Technology. His research there focuses on natural language processing for low-resource African languages. He discusses how he became involved in this research and its significance. We then talk about the bias that is prevalent in the field of machine learning and why it is one of the driving forces behind the research that he does. Tosin tells us that prior to his PhD studies, he had a startup computer business in Nigeria where he built websites and domains. We talk about some of the challenges he faced and also some of the important lessons he learned while working in industry. To hear about all of this and so much more, tune in. Hi, Tosin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Anne. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, perfect. I'm also really glad to have you here and for you honoring the invitation. So we're just going to get started. First things first, please just give us a brief introduction. Who is Tosin? Where is he from? Where you're based? And just briefly, what are you currently doing?
Yeah, thank you. Tosin is originally from Nigeria. I was born and bred in Lagos, so spent quite a lot of my years in Lagos, Nigeria. Currently, I'm in Sweden, the north of Sweden. It's usually cold. I'm here pursuing my PhD in machine learning, more specifically in natural language processing, looking at Swedish, some African languages, and of course, English. I enjoy machine learning a lot. So that has made me pursue my PhD here in Sweden, even though I had my first degree in University of Ibadan back in Oyo State in Nigeria, and then had a postgraduate in computer science at the University of Lagos in Nigeria. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for that brief introduction. So before we get into everything that you do, right, I always like us to just find out a little bit more away from you, from the science. So you mentioned you were born and bred in Nigeria, specifically Lagos. So for me, a person who's never been, if you had to be like, okay, and where's that one place in Lagos that I need to go when I touch down in Nigeria? That's one of your favorite spaces to go to.
For example, the beach. The beach is one popular. In fact, we have quite several beaches in Lagos. You have the Eleko Beach. It's quite famous for hosting gatherings where people could relax and just get the cool breeze of the Atlantic Sea. So that used to be like my getaway spot for some years. Whenever I just want to like reflect and just get the cool breeze of because Lagos. Sometimes could be a bit hot. We have temperatures above 30 degrees, especially during, really dry seasons. So the beaches will be really one fantastic, venue to go to. And then you have really lovely hotels with your restaurants. But I think I would say going to Eleko Beach would be one great place to be.
I'll put that on my travel bucket list.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully when we are allowed to travel freely, these are the places we need to visit. And I think the pandemic has showed us the importance of appreciating what we have in our different countries, and also realizing that it's really good to go out and see things. And that's why I'm really excited to hear when I interview somebody, like, where's that one place that I need to go? And I just write it in my bucket list. So anybody else who's listening is like, oh, okay, that sounds really good. No, thank you so much for your for playing tour guide for those couple of minutes. Now, just back to you and what you do. Before we get to understand how you landed up in Sweden, and you mentioned in the beginning that you love machine learning, but how does it begin? What's the genesis of the story? How did you even fall in love with science? I want us to start from the beginning. Was it something, were they people, or what's the story?
Yeah, I think for me, it was innate in the sense that growing up as a young child, I kind of had interest in the stars and seeing the moon, trying to study about them. I was inquisitive how the moon was, got to be where it is, how many stars are up in the sky. So there were times at night I would just look up to the skies and, really wonder about the nature of the stars. So I bought books. This was when I was, finishing primary school, getting into secondary school. So I would buy books. For example, I remember a popular book that came out many years ago then was a brief history of time from the Big Bang to black holes by Professor Stephen Hawking. And that book was like my introduction to astronomy, because he made the book quite simple enough for anybody of any background to understand and be able to at least understand some of the basic principles behind astronomy and physics. So that's how my interest was. It was inborn or intrinsic. But then, of course, I got into science, the science class. Then you would have science, arts, and then maybe social science. So naturally, I went into science class. And then when it came to choosing university and my area of discipline, I had mechanical engineering in mind, but then I went in for physics. But just before I went in, my dad had bought me a palm top. Actually, I think he got it as a gift, and then he decided to give it to me. He apparently felt he didn't need it, so he said, "Okay, let me give it to my son." And my fascination with computers began from that, because I was so surprised that you could write programs and make them behave dynamically. It's fascinating for me. So even though already in my mind, I was like, I think I have to switch to computer science. So I made sure that I took a lot of computer science courses. I bought books, read on my own, practiced on my own. And then when my undergraduate course was over, I went for a postgraduate in computer science. And then finally, after getting involved in industry and then starting my own startup business for a number of years. And then I felt the challenge to also still study more and get involved in research. And that's how I came for PhD in Sweden.
Wow, what a journey. What an absolute journey. And it's quite amazing that it just took that one thing that, your dad handing you that gift, and it just activated this curiosity, because I believe that's what science is all about. Pursuing that curiosity further and further and further and further. And look at you now, all of the things that you are doing. And you mentioned that you are in Sweden, currently pursuing your PhD in machine learning, involved in named entity recognitions, which is short for NER, for low resource African languages. Okay, so now can you just tell us how you got involved in all of that and why you specifically chose to focus in that area of studies?
Yeah, the startup company I started in Nigeria is an IT firm, and I was involved in building websites, hosting domains for people, for small businesses. But then I felt I needed a bigger challenge, and then I felt doing a PhD will give me that challenge, and then I could add it to the business portfolio. But in the end, I sold the business to someone else, and then got the offer from Luleå University of Technology in north of Sweden. And then that's how I joined the program. And it's such a beautiful place. The supervisor I have, Professor Marcus Lewicki, and my assistant supervisor, Fortini, they're actually wonderful people who encourage you to do what you want to do, what your desire is with regards to research. They just want you to do it and do it well. So I'm someone who loves quotes. I like reading. So chatbots, playing with words was kind of like a natural thing for me. So going to NLP, focusing on NLP, that's natural language processing, kind of like felt like the natural thing, because you have other areas of machine learning, for example, computer vision. Even though I have a bit of exposure with computer vision, but my natural flair was for natural language processing. So I focused on that. And the startup I worked, that I developed, actually, we had been developing chatbots as well. So I felt, okay, why not do data-driven chatbots using machine learning? So some of the underlying technologies with regards to developing chatbots also involve named entity recognition. You want to be able to identify specific names of cities, of countries, of geographical locations, maybe time, people, like presidents and proper names of people. So named entity recognition is quite important to developing chatbots that have a good degree of understanding. So that's how, of course, I discovered Masakane, which is the platform where we have quite a lot of African researchers doing great, wonderful things with their initiatives. And then the initiative for the named entity recognition for African languages came up, which was led by David. And then I offered to help with that, volunteered as an annotator for the Yoruba language. The numbers were small initially, but then, of course, more people joined in, and then we were able to annotate. The data set was taken from news website, which published Yoruba news. Then, of course, you had other 9 African languages with other volunteers working on those other languages. It took us a few months to do the annotation, and then, of course, experiments were run, and then results tabulated, which finally turned out to be a paper. So that was the journey in that regard.
Okay, so in essence, you what does this project seek to do? You mentioned that you've got all these different African languages and the chatbots. So what's the overall vision in the project?
Okay, well, with regards to the named entity recognition, the named entity recognition, like I said earlier, it's a form of technology that helps you to identify like proper names, proper places, where instead of, for example, if we use a concrete example, if we were doing a search on maybe say Google, and then we put a search for apple. Apple could mean the apple fruits that we eat, which we would represent with a small a in a sentence. Then apple could also represent the famous American corporation that makes iPhone, which would normally be represented with a capital A. So in differentiating these two entities, named entity recognition is very good. So it's good for information retrieval, for doing searches, to be able to differentiate between two entities. So currently, even after finishing this NER project, we have hosted the models. The models can be tried out on the Hugging Face library or platform, where people can use it and try it out to see how accurate or effective it is. So it's good for such purposes. And then it's good for those who may want to develop, say, chatbots in African languages. Then you want the chatbot to be able to distinguish, like we said, from the example of Apple we gave earlier, where they can distinguish proper names, proper nouns, so that their chatbot delivers more meaningful conversation with humans. So those are applications where this project can be used.
It's quite interesting that you're doing this work, and I think it's very important. In fact, I was watching a documentary recently. It was on Netflix. I don't know if you watched it. It's called Coded Bias, talking about how artificial intelligence is a little bit more biased to the West, be it in terms of the color of the skin. It's more biased towards male. There's a lot of biases in terms of when this technology, artificial intelligence, was initially developed. So, as an African researcher now, I think obviously we can tell the importance that there's a gap, there's something missing that it seems like as much as this technology is advanced, right, it's still a huge gap in terms of us people here in Africa. So in your opinion, is that one of the reasons why you do the work that you do?
Yes, you're very right. I mean, it's an observation that has been made in many places that, yes, there is bias in the current systems, the current data set we have. And I think researchers are coming to realize that and are making efforts, at least some researchers are making effort to try and close the gap, try and remove the bias that we may find, whether it's with regards to bias in terms of geography or ethnicity or gender. Yes, it's part of the reason why I'm also involved in this aspect of research, where we want to pay attention to low resource languages, so that they can also have some good degree of representation in such systems. For example, there's also another project which I'm working on, which has to do with conversational systems or chatbots in African languages. And for a few months now, since we started, we have noticed that it has been quite a huge challenge getting data sets and conversations in the languages that we're trying to develop. So yes, it's important for researchers to identify this gap and try and fill this gap. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think the fact that there are researchers who are tackling this, it actually can inspire younger people who are coming into this area of studies to be like, hey, there's something that I can do that I can relate to, passionate to doing something that you can recognize, where you can see yourself into. And I really love the fact that you're part of all of these projects. And I've had the privilege of meeting other people who are also part of these projects. And I think it's so important, because when I was watching that documentary, I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that there were all these biases. As much as this technology is great, but I also personally feel like for us normal, let me not say normal, for us people who are not in the field of computer sciences, it's something that we are not alerted about. It's only if you are in that research where you start to notice these things. And I love the fact that there are researchers who are tackling this gap, and they want to improve it. And kudos to you and all of this amazing research research that you're doing. I'm really, really excited for this kind of research.
Thank you.
Yeah. So earlier on in our conversation, you mentioned that before you started this PhD, you worked in industry and you had your own startup where you said that you're building websites and domains for different people in Nigeria, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you said that it didn't go as you had hoped, right? So what were some of the reasons why it didn't go as well as you had planned?
Initially, it started out, quite well, being a very small, just started out as a very small business, and it was able to pick up within the first 2 years quite rapidly. But then, of course, given government policies, the infrastructure problems that we have in Nigeria, for example, when you take the issue of power in Nigeria, unfortunately, sometimes we don't get power for up to 4 hours in a So you have to find a way, think and find a way to, and then of course, for somebody working with computers, you need to be able to power your computers. So you have to buy a generator, fuel generator, and these bring additional costs for a small business trying to avoid the heavy burden of debts and loans. It becomes a huge challenge. So the infrastructure, having regular, constant power, was one of the key problems all throughout, the period of the business. And then, of course, you had government policies. At some point, because some of the hosting was done outside the country with domains that were outside the country, and you had to pay in Forex to those businesses. And then the government would come up with policies that would completely ban certain cards that you would use, or put limitations on the kind of transactions or amount of transaction you can do. So those created serious problems during the life of the business. So it made it stunt at some point, and made the development or the growth of the business really, really difficult. And then at that stage, of course, one would think, okay, what could one do, either to improve the business or to look for, pursue other interests. And then that was when I thought, okay, well, coupled with the fact that I needed new challenges with regards to learning new things, having a PhD, and I felt, okay, maybe I should sell the business, and then that was what happened at the end of the day.
That's you touched on so many important things, specifically about the infrastructure and electricity. It's a common African problem. Even here in South Africa, we have what we call load shedding, where electricity just goes out, like you said, for 2 to 4 hours, and it's debilitating for small businesses because they cannot cover those types of costs. And I can only imagine worse for a computer business. That must be even more limiting. So do you think then that as much as African countries want to be at the forefront of, there's this, we're trying to go into the fourth industrial revolution, etc., or into this thing, do you think we have the right support, be it for infrastructure or for policies, for startups like yours or anybody else to actually succeed in the African environment?
I think more needs to be done by the African governments. Like, for example, in Nigeria, it's unfortunate what's currently going on with so many things. I think we have too many distractions in Africa. Distractions in terms of we're still trying to fix how to govern ourselves. And that really shouldn't be our focus. It's taking too much energy, too much time, rather than focusing on, building infrastructures, helping small businesses. So I think that the focus, there's been too much distraction on still trying to fix governance. So a lot still has to be done. I know some African countries are making really good progress and effort. Unfortunately, they don't get all the attention, all the time. The bad news tends to overwhelm even the little news we have. So it's quite sad, because I know Rwanda is doing quite well in many regards. I know there are other countries as well. I think Botswana might, also doing quite well. So there is good news, but a lot more still has to be done, and quite, quickly, because each passing day, the times wait for no one. The West is moving on quite speedily. Already we hear that 5G is out, and some countries they're rolling it out. And then I hear that some companies are already working on 6G.
Oh, wow.
China working on 6G. Yeah, so we shouldn't keep wasting time on trying to solve governance when the world is leaving us behind. We need to catch up very fast. So a lot still has to be done.
Yeah, no, it's true. And we hope that soon we will. But I mean, with African researchers like yourselves who are doing the work, hopefully the people in policy can be motivated to do what they need to do, and they already have the people, the intelligence, because it's there for them to implement all of this stuff. And as much as, let's say, for example, for you, it didn't work out the way you wanted to, but I mean, like you said, it allowed you to seek other avenues and to challenge yourself and to do something different and even travel the world, which is amazing. Yeah. So it's all not so bad, specifically in your journey. And it's been quite interesting hearing how it all meshed out for you. And before we go, I always just ask for a word of advice for somebody who is maybe, for example, inspired to do what you're doing, or just general life advice. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think two things. Identify your passion and then pursue your passion. You will notice from my story that I mentioned, I already had an intrinsic interest in science, and along the way I would see where my interest lied and then will pursue it. And I think it makes life easier and more meaningful when one does that, rather than just maybe join the bandwagon, or people are doing this, or my friends are doing this, so let me also just join them because it seems to be popular, rather than you looking inward and finding out, what do you enjoy doing? What do you have interest in? And then pursuing that. So I think, yes, identify your passion and then pursue your passion.
That's some great life advice. Yeah, I love that. Identify your passion and just pursue it. And it's been so lovely. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your journey. And I wish you all of the best with everything that you are doing.
Thank you very much. It's been great being here.
Oh, fantastic. And to everybody else who's tuned in, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. Until next time, goodbye.